How's it going, Father? How have you been? You're very welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, John. I
Thank you
hope
very much.
you're well.
All good here. Thank you. So the reason we're speaking is regarding, I guess, in recent years, it's become one of the more well-known kind of murder cases from the Troubles. It's of course of a man whose nickname was the Mad Monk, the Joe Lynsky. Small bit of background just to refresh people who might not be familiar, or maybe. Okay. So as I mentioned, he became a monk in his mid-teens, kind of unconventional background for a future IRA man. He's from West Belfast, Beachmount area. He quit the monks, I think, in his 20s. He went on to become the Belfast Provisional's intel officer. He was killed, it's believed, because he was involved in with the wife of an interned IRA man, and then this kind of love complication, and he decided to have his love rival, if you will, killed, and this was found out, and the decision was made to take him over the border and eventually execute him. This was done by a small group at the time, called the Unknowns, which included, of course, from Say Nothing, the Price sisters. Yeah, like I mentioned, he was portrayed in the earlier episodes of Say Nothing, that series that's recently out, based on the book, of course. A couple of weeks after the show aired, a body was exhumed in County Monaghan, which at the time was believed to be him, but turned out not to be the case. It must have been tough on his family. But yeah, so his body is still one of the disappeared, that people refer to. So with all that intro, you might tell us a little bit about maybe your life at the time of being called to give this confession, just in 1972. It's most bloody and violent year of the whole thing. So yeah, give us a little bit about your life at the time, when you were called to this.
Well, then I was back in Ireland from Scotland on my way to America. Um, and I got a request to hear the confession of a man who wanted to see a priest. Now, when any priest, especially in those days, were told someone wants to see a priest, all over Ireland they knew exactly what that meant. They wanted to go to confession. And confession is not extreme unction. It's not the last rites, as it used to be called. It's a confession. And when I was asked that, I said, yes, I will do that. And I was asked to do that by the then Chief of Staff of the IRA, Sean Stiofain. And I immediately said yes. That's all I knew about the individual. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his background. I didn't know anything. And, when a priest is asked to go and see someone, you don't ask questions. You don't say, well, who is he? What is he? You just do it or refuse to do it. I would never refuse to do that. So I went to see him. I realized he told me his name. I heard his confession, and that was it. I was picked up to meet with him, and I was dropped off after I heard the confession. And essentially, that's it. That's the essence of it. Now, obviously, a confession by its very nature is confidential, and nobody ever talks about what someone said in the confessional. But that's the essence of my experience with him. I was impressed when I met him. He was totally at ease. He was very friendly. He thanked me warmly for coming to hear his confession. We chatted for a little bit, and I spent 20 minutes with him. And later on, I would often wonder what happened to him. And of course, I didn't hear anything. and there was no news about him. And clearly, we thought in those days that if someone had been killed, well, then everybody would immediately know about it because the body would be there. And I thought, well, nothing happened, you know. And it was only in 2010 when the IRA publicly admitted that they had killed Joe Lynsky, God rest him. It was only then that I realized that he had been killed. And like everybody else, I didn't know anything about that. And there were, in general, they're called the disappeared, the number of people that were executed by the IRA and buried secretly. And there are 4 names left, 4 bodies not found, including Joe Lynsky. So I remember being then very shocked and amazed. And here I have to be careful that I don't add in stuff in my own mind that I learned later, because I had learned very, very little at the time. But I looking back then, I thought, oh, good Lord, how could, if he knew he was going to be executed, how could he have been so at peace? So calm. I mean, just a regular confession. That amazed me. It still amazes me. And then, of course, I was further surprised when I was told that the investigating body, the independent commission set up to find the missing bodies of the disappeared, that they wanted to interview me. And that surprised me. And I said, of course, yes, I will cooperate, because the deal was part of the Good Friday Agreement, and it was signed between the Irish government and the British government. Excuse me. And everybody, including the IRA, and including all the loyalist groups, and including everybody, were urging everyone to participate, just in case they had some knowledge that would help the investigation. So nonetheless, I was surprised, because their interest was finding the body. I had absolutely not a clue on that. Still don't. Apparently nobody knows. But, you know, they urge people, anyone who does know should come forward and contact the commission. So I met with the top investigator about 8 years ago. And the first thing I said to him was, tell me, Jeff, Nuffner was his name. He's John Hill took over, and John Hill just retired yesterday. I said to Jeff, I met with him in Fermanagh. I said, Jeff, tell me this now before we begin, and please level with me. Did the British intelligence tell you I was the priest involved, or did the Irish Republican movement? And he immediately said the Irish Republican movement. And I thought, oh my goodness, I wished they had given me heads up, but they didn't, whoever they would be. But I was surprised that he wanted to interview me, but that was their job. They wanted to. I had contact with him, even though it was a confessional contact and very brief. They still wanted. So that's it. I told them exactly what I knew, which was very limited, had nothing to do with where the body is, had nothing to do, obviously, with the execution or any of that. I was probably more surprised than anyone, because occasionally when I would go back home to Ireland, I would discreetly ask sort of Republican-minded people, did you ever know a Joe Lynsky? Never heard of him. No, nobody ever knew. And that sort of, I thought, well, that's great, because, the guy is still alive somewhere. And then there were all sorts of misleading things published in the newspapers, that he was seen in London, that he was seen in New York. And it was very well covered up. It's a very sad period,
I wanted to ask you there. Obviously you can't go into detail about like what he confessed or anything, but like, would I be correct in saying that, like, if a guy knows he's about to die, most people, if they were to give a confession, you could probably tell from the confession that they thought they were very close to the end, because you would probably have more perspective and you'd be thinking like kind of wider. Was there anything like that out of him?
Well, now remember, Joe, God rest him, was a former monk, very advanced and very educated, I found out later. And he would have known exactly the difference between extreme unction, the anointing of the sick on the point of death. He would have known absolutely the difference between that and, hey, Father, I want to go to confession. And people, especially in those days, went to confession very regularly in Ireland. IRA guys, everyone, maybe IRA guys more often than others because of the nature of their activity and life, So Joe would have known exactly the difference, and there was no confusion. He didn't request the anointing of the sick, the last sacrament, at the point of death. So that's all I knew, and it's all I wanted to know. I didn't ask one question, because that wasn't my job. It wasn't my job, And it's, maybe a lot of people don't understand that, but every priest the world over knows that, hey, someone asks to go to confession, you don't say, is he a Democrat or Republican? Is he black or white? Hispanic? Nonsense. Nothing. You say, sure, I'll do it. And that's it. I did it.
Did you get the sense at all, even in hindsight, when you look back, that like this fellow was being held held against his will, because you obviously went to a place where there was fellas minding him. Like what sort of vibe did you get off the fellas minding him?
That's the other amazing thing. When I walked in to the house, I don't know where it was. I was in the car, keeping my eyes closed for about a half an hour. Now, I don't know if it took that long, or if the people who were driving went round in circles in case they were being followed. Or I don't know any of that. When I went in, now remember, I was only 28 at that time, and there were two boys in the kitchen. I saw a sort of older men, probably 50, 60. They were pottering around, making tea, for God's sake, as you'd see in any Irish home. And they said, oh, hello, Father. Joe's up there. And I went up into a few steps up and saw him. And that was it. And when I came back out, there was a fellow coming out of the kitchen with another cup of tea. That's it. And I also, later on, thinking about it, and these thoughts never occurred at the time because they were never relevant. They were not in my mind at the time. But when I heard that he was killed, I thought, why didn't he escape? He was a big, strong guy. He could have knocked those two guys out within a minute. He could have escaped. But why didn't he? Why didn't he escape? I don't know. That really surprised me. There was no fear. There was no anything. If anything, I thought at the time was that, oh gosh, this is a very important IRA operator, and he's been protected.
Right.
I thought he was being protected, you know. And especially because I had been asked by the chief of staff to visit him, you know.
How was this? This wasn't your first time meeting Sean McStefan, was it?
No, I'd met him before. I had, internment was done in August the 9th, 1971. And I was home at the time. And for the marriage, to perform the marriage of my brother Frank, who was the member of parliament at that time for Fermanagh in South Tyrone. That was the reason for being home. And of course, nobody knew internment was coming, but it happened. And my brother Frank was going to be married 2 days later. So I think and he was, and he was sure he was going to be interned. And my job was to get him across the border at least the night before, so that at least he'd be able to get married, and then he was prepared to accept the consequences. A wonderful way to begin married life. But that was what people had to live with, you know. So anyway, there was a very big demonstration hurriedly arranged in Enniskillen protesting internment. I attended it, and it was perfectly peaceful, but surrounded by soldiers and the RUC. And it was alleged that literally the first stone thrown was by a follower of Ian Paisley, another minister. That started the bit of a riot. And my job was to try to keep the peace. I was the only priest there. I, at one stage, convinced a young man a neighbor of mine, who's now dead, but a young man, to give me a brick that he was about to fire. And then I dropped it. Then I turned around and I saw the police whaling into another young guy, 17, 18-year-old kid, a boy. And I went over and I said, come on now, man, there's no need for that. There's no need for that. And they stopped beating him and instead grabbed me and put me in the wagon, because they knew exactly who I was. That I was the brother of the local MP, whom they were constantly threatening and harassing and bullying and making his life as dangerous and as comfortable as possible. And sure enough, of course, about a year later, there was assassination attempt, but he was only shot in the leg. In the highest guarded town in the north at that time, the police and army were over everything. And yet there was allegedly a Protestant guy, former member of the British Army, was able to follow Frank out, and before he made it turn into his home, open fire on him. And the police were all over the place. Another perfect case of collusion, one of the best. one of the best examples, but of course not all that well known, because thank God Frank wasn't killed. But anyway, I was taken to prison for several hours, the police barracks in Enniskillen, and I welcomed it because I was able to give comfort and sort of a bit of leadership to all the young people there. There were dozens and dozens, maybe anything up to 60 or 70, all in front of me, standing up in a line, and there was a policeman taking down details. And I said in a big voice, do not say anything until they tell you what your rights are. And all these young guys, perfect obedience. That's wonderful. They all followed my and stopped talking. And then a British soldier came up, grabbed me by the arm, small little fellow, oozing hatred and bigotry. I'd never seen the likes of this in my life. And I was used to the RUC, but this guy was out for blood. And he pulled me over. I didn't resist. I went. And he said, listen, mate, you have no rights. And that's what's killing you. And I said, do you realize that you've just summed up His Majesty, Her Majesty's treatment of Ireland in a single sentence? We have no right. And that's what's killing us. And he was exasperated. He didn't know what to do with that one. And he just disappeared. And I went over and I said, well, before that, I said, now you come with me. We went back to the policeman on the desk. Young guy, a sort of big, strong guy, countryman. And I said, officer, this British soldier tells me I have no rights, that none of us here have any rights. Is that your position? Is that British law in Enniskillen? And in fairness to him, this big RUC man, probably in the 20s, he had the grace and decency to bow his head and never answered. And I thought, well, now, there's a good example of the difference between the British soldier and an RUC man, because for all their faults, the RUC, they're local guys, they're local people. This guy is a rabid international killer. He'll go anywhere and he'll kill for Her Majesty, and he'll do exactly what he's told to do, as they did all over the empire, as they did when they were torturing President Obama's grandfather in Kenya. They tortured him on behalf of Her Majesty, the late Queen. So anyway, I was summoned to court. I was released at 3:00 in the morning. And I had read even then a lot about the Black struggle for freedom in America. And I knew, and it was clear in my head, I was dumped out 7 miles from home on the sidewalk. And I was so reminiscent in my mind about the typical plan of the sheriffs, the bigoted white sheriffs in Alabama and Mississippi. They would release young black guys in the middle of the night and tip off the Klan. And the Klan would come and kill them. And I thought, oh my God, you know. And also before I left the prison, or the barracks, the local head of the RUC barracks in Kinawley came out, and because I guess he knew who I was, And there were other local fellows there, but he came out, and as I was leaving, I said, "No, do I have your word? Come on," I said, "You're supposed to be the protector in Kinole. Do I have your word that these people will not be harmed?" He said, "Absolutely, count on it." And I sort of believed him because, despite all the theory and the philosophy, if someone is in a uniform and you ask them, you tend to say, "Well, yeah, oh, good." It's sort of a relief to hear that. I only knew the following day that my younger brother, well, I knew he had been arrested because he ran up to find out what was happening to me. So they arrested him. And they, throughout the night, would open the little door, the little window in his cell and point in the rifles and click them. That went on all night, despite the solemn promise that they would be well treated, Anyway, I was then summoned to court in Enniskillen because I had interfered with the police, allegedly, in the pursuit of their duty. I never knew the pursuit of their duty were beating up young people. But anyway, I appeared in court in September. And the judge said, "How do you plead?" I said, "I don't plead anyway because I don't recognize this court." Sort of fighting words. Everybody knew what that meant. And then because of that, very quickly, I became known as the priest who refused to recognize the court. I don't think it was ever done before, or since. And obviously, to get back to Stiofain, of course, he was very aware of that. Every Catholic, especially Irish Republican, knew me by that stage, just from that incident, So I guess he trusted me in the end, and he asked me to go and hear that confession, I'm glad I did. It's a sad remembrance. But you do your duty.
Of course. Thank you very much for everything you shared with us. I just want to ask you one more thing. Even if you can't go into like any sort of details or anything, are there any other cases where even in hindsight you found out that you were taking confession or doing a visit or something for someone
No,
that later turned out to be murdered?
That's the only one. That's for certainly the only one.
Just on an emotional level, when the jigsaw got put together in your head and you realized that you had given essentially like a last confession to a fella who was executed not too long after. How did it feel? Just not even like as a professional, like a priest, just on an emotional level. How did that feel when you found out?
Well, I learned it almost 40 years later in 2010. I was shocked, and but also puzzled, as I mentioned earlier on. How was Joe so calm? I mean, how is that possible? And that is still my basic sentiment: shocked and still puzzled. I'm
not sure. I'm not sure if Joe knew at the time that he was going to be, or maybe he just thought he was going to be brought somewhere to be questioned or something.
There you go. I mean, we don't know. We do not know, and that's why I don't use the phrase "the last confession." Maybe it wasn't the last confession. I don't see any estimate anywhere about when they thought he was killed. It could have been weeks later. I don't know. could have been the following day. I just don't know. Anyway, my abiding remembrance of him was he was a nice guy and a good guy, and just a normal, friendly man. But then, of course, one learned that he was the head of Belfast intelligence for the IRA. So, I mean, presumably that title comes with quite a bit of ability and knowledge and coolness, and I don't know.
Very good. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. There's also, I'll put a link, but there's articles about this too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, anything else you wanted to mention about it that we didn't get around to?
No, that covers it fairly well. Nice to see you again, John. Good luck to you. God bless.